Priyamvada Natrajan this morning, and as usual, you'll get to know who she is through our conversation. And this is part of a book that we are doing with Her Key and Ink together called Ink Her. The idea is to feature 49 women who are, I mean, of Indian origin or from India that are doing amazing things in the world. So by 49, because 49% of the women world are women. So we thought it's good to feature 49 women from as many different disciplines as possible. So today we have with us someone who's charters the uncharted territory and literally goes through where places are dark and sheds some light on it, literally. And so I thought today we'll have a conversation with Priya about what she has been and where she's going. So Priya, thank you so much for joining us. I know your schedule is full, and as a professor at Yale and many other things that you do, it's a great honor and privilege to have you with us. So we'll have a great conversation for the next 30 minutes about what you're doing, and then we have audience, so they will ask questions and then
Yeah.
we'll answer them. So we thought we'll set the context first and spend a little bit of time in your personal journey and a lot on your professional journey. So we all learned something new today. And so, first of all, this has been an amazing year for you already with
Yes.
a
No,
lot of,
first of all, I want to say thank you so much, Lakshmi, for
yeah,
inviting me to be part of this. It's a real privilege.
yeah,
And right, excited to share, whatever you want to
yeah.
know, my journey and my work.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to, give a brief history of your journey, but really get into your professional journey, and then we'll go back to your personal journey. I mean, as someone who grew up in Coimbatore and Delhi, went to US at a very young age, studied at MIT, and if I look at some of the, and I started by saying this has been a big year for you, so, in terms of your recognitions for the work that you have done, I just want to start with, from 1997 being the first woman astrophysicist ever elected as a fellow at Trinity College to 2025 now, where you won the Daniel Heinemann Prize in astrophysics. It's been an amazing journey for you. And
Yeah.
I want to, do a little bit on your professional journey of, you came to MIT, you studied everything from history to science to astrophysics, all sorts of things, and then returned to astrophysics, really. So tell
Yeah.
me a little bit about what is it with astrophysics that made you come back to it after your journey? And tell me a little bit about that journey through from anywhere from history to physics,
Right.
What did that open for you and what made you choose astrophysics?
Yeah, so I think that I was one of those very fortunate people. When I was incredibly young, I managed to get, I chose MIT for two reasons. First, they gave me a full scholarship. So I come from a family of academics, so that was a
Yeah,
prerequisite. And at that time,
right.
it was quite unusual to come for your undergraduate degree to the United
Mhm.
States. So I
Yeah,
came there
yes.
for two things. One is that, they were willing to bet on my future with the full scholarship. Second, they had an undergraduate research opportunities program. And they were
Mm,
one of the earliest universities to actually engage undergraduates. And I had gotten a taste of research already in high school in India. So, and
mm,
I was hooked. That kind of hooked me. But, talking about the choice of astrophysics,
yeah,
right? I was very
yeah.
young, right? My parents, who are professors, bought me a microscope and a telescope. So it
Mm-hmm.
was pretty clear to me early on that, the telescope was the instrument of choice. And I think in many ways, the reason is there was something very seductive about not
Mm-hmm.
being able, looking through a telescope, seeing really far, but not being able to touch or sense. So there's a
Yeah,
mystery that comes with, you just allowed a glimpse Unlike the
Yeah.
microscope where, you can manipulate the sample, you can, and I think for me, and it turns out that this is a feature that actually haunts my journey and that
Yeah.
into history and
Yeah.
philosophy of science and then brought me back. So,
Yeah.
cosmology is a discipline, a very special scientific discipline where you cannot do controlled experiments.
Yeah.
You cannot
And
do any
also
lab
the
experiments.
interesting thing from your parents' point of view, they gave you a microscope where you can go to the most miniature things and a telescope where you can go to the most macro unknown thing. So you went from, like, I mean, if you think of powers of 10 kind of a thing, you went from that
Exactly. Right.
minus to the plus all in your childhood. And
Yeah.
you chase dark matter, you chase the unknown, and you always say that you chase the unknown. And I want to talk a little bit about your scientific career early on. Uh, you're a physicist, and you're brown, you're a woman. I mean, there are so many things that are unusual about that journey. And you talk sometimes about finding your tribe in science. So it's sort of, tell me a little bit about a journey that transcends all these things of being woman, brown, whatever, and finding that tribe in science where your purpose is something different. Because, many people struggle with that journey of being alone in that journey or being
Yeah.
different. So how does the difference go away, and what comes?
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question. And I totally agree with you that there is a way in which we need to transcend our identities when we identify our passions and we want to go after what we want to go
Mhm.
and explore. So in my case, I think that it was a certain kind of, I wouldn't call it drive, it's like compulsion. The
Yeah,
compulsion to learn and to know more and never be satisfied with the level of understanding that I currently have, right? So want to delve deeper and deeper. And for that, so, I was always obsessed, even as a child, with mastery. Like you had to master. And what I have found through my journey, through my undergraduate years, and later on, and to this day, that, if you focus on mastery and not on career accolades or this or that, or, the sort of the trappings that come with, or, citations in terms of scientists, right? It's your impact or science, how many citations, who's read your paper, if you go beyond all of that. And I have always managed to go beyond all of that because the thing that drives me is, as I said, it's a compulsion to understand and to know. And I'm never satisfied. So I want to know more. So I never feel, I know it doesn't sound, contentment is not the word, but whatever I know, even now, I feel like I know what I know, and what I know really well, but there are lots of things I don't know, and I want to learn.
yeah,
I
yeah.
project that. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that has been very professionally useful. So that's what allows
Right,
people to see me beyond, and a little, brown woman who, has a real facility for math and physics. They see beyond that because they
correct.
can see when I talk about my work, when I talk about what I'm thinking about or what I've done, they can sort of see this curiosity and passion. And that's
Mm-hmm.
because my preoccupation is not with the result. So, in a way, my mother always teases me that even
Yeah.
though I have read all our Sanskrit scriptures, I learned Sanskrit. I was very fascinated with Sanskrit for a very long time when I was in high school. And so,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, the Gita, right? That you
Right,
do what you have to do and don't
right.
think about the outcome. And I would always say, my God, that's such a hard thing. But I've kind of tried my best
Yeah.
to live it inadvertently,
Mm.
not sort of self-consciously saying that I'm following the Bhagavad Gita. But
Yeah,
I have found that that's what has helped me. And finding one's tribe, I find that we evolve and we change. And I intellectually, the facets of my mind are getting chiseled with time. There are changes, there are shifts, and there's no static tribe. So you're constantly also looking for your tribe.
correct,
For me,
correct.
I
Yeah.
think the biggest challenge was that, in particular in science, right, it attracts a lot of people who have
Mm-hmm.
a very single focus because that's the way for careerist success, right? If you want to write a grant, you need to, and get the grant, you have to be the world's expert on that one
That's
tiny,
right.
tiny thing.
Yes.
So I think the field, the profession is geared towards that kind of personality. So my kind of person who is interested in a lot of things and is
Correct.
deeply
Yeah.
thoughtful about the context, right? The context in which we are doing scientific work is really important. And for
Right.
me, it's not a post facto thing. It's very
Mm-hmm.
much live. And that's what I've gotten from my history and philosophy training. That
Mm-hmm.
when I have a result, I always think about, okay, how did I arrive at it? What are the
Mm-hmm.
limits of what I can know right now?
Mm-hmm.
Limits of my mind, limits of the techniques, limits of the
Mm-hmm.
instruments. So I'm constantly aware of that so that then I
Mm-hmm.
can craft what the next step is going to be intellectually. Like, what do I
Right.
need to do better next? Do I need
Correct.
to build
Yeah.
a more sophisticated model? Do I need better computers? What do I need, right, to make progress
Right.
in
Right.
understanding?
And
So
the interesting, I mean, I sorry, I just want to underscore what you said in terms of when there are too many differences per se, instead of focusing on all that, if you focus on where you're going, you know, you not only find a tribe, but you transcend yourself, you know, you don't see yourself as I'm a woman, I'm brown, I'm short, I'm tall, whatever. You go beyond all that and say, where am I going? Where do I need to go? And that's fascinating. And I want to bring back this thing between Bhagavad Gita and Big Bang, you know. So it's sort of, one of the things people always ask is, science is a pursuit of everything can be explained by science, whereas spirituality or, whatever, be it Bhagavad Gita or a Bible or a Quran, it doesn't matter what it is. It's a very different way to get to where do we come from, what are we about, delving this deep into ourselves, whether you call it consciousness or whatever. They're two different journeys, is seen as two different journeys. So I would love to get your
yeah,
feedback
I
on
mean, I think, yeah,
your what you think about this.
yeah. So I think that there are different ways of knowing the world and the self.
Mm-hmm,
And uh, and I think science can answer very specific kinds of how questions. How did
mm-hmm,
we come to be? How does this work? How does nature operate in this circumstance? And all of the spiritual knowledge that humans have created over time answer a very different kind of question. So it's a they're not after the same thing. They're after completely different sets of questions, different kinds of answers. So I think spirituality and our cultural religious traditions have focused on the why question. There's a simplified way to kind of demarcate. But I don't think science, I've always balked at people talking about science versus religion. There's no versus. It's a category mistake to think they are trying to explain the same thing. They are not. These are very different kinds of explanations that are offered. Science has a set of methodologies and a framework within which you can ask very specific kinds of questions and get very specific kinds of answers. And there's a logic to it, there's a structure to it, and there is a sort of an aspect of building up. So there's a foundation, so there's foundational knowledge, and then you build up and you can ask more and more sophisticated questions. And ultimately in science, it's the confluence of ideas and instruments that kind of really propels you to a deeper understanding. Whereas these other religious traditions, they don't come from this kind of, empirical investigation. It's more experiential. One could argue that perhaps science needs to incorporate a little bit more of experiential understanding. And I think that's a point well taken. But these are sort of the ways in which, sort of very simplistic ways, we could go on
And
and on
vice
about this for the
versa,
whole
right?
day.
I mean, religion should also, instead of blindly following, understand, better understand. I think both approaches can use a little bit of each other instead of
Yeah.
being dogmatic about each approach. The other thing I want to talk about is that science it's a marathon. It's a long-term game.
Mhm.
A theory that and I'd love for you to talk about it, something you came up with, a theory you came up in 2006 is now proven by having much better telescopes and all that stuff. But when you propose something, when you say, hey, this is my theory, it's coming from your imagination. It's not coming from something you've seen out there. What you're saying is that if this is happening, maybe this is the reason. And then it takes a long time for the real world or to catch up. I mean, and you may have been proven, you may not have been proven. I mean, it's just maybe in some ways there are 20 people with 20 theories, and you had 20 theories, and this has been proven. So tell me a little bit about the role of imagination, and explain to us a little bit of what is it that you said, and what is it that's been proven, because we have something as powerful as a James telescope today. So tell me a little bit about your theory and what's been proven.
Yeah. So, the traditionally it was believed actually from in many ways, right? I have inadvertently followed Subramaniam Chandrasekhar's footsteps, right? Ending up at
Yeah,
Trinity College, becoming a fellow there, etc. But he
yeah.
had shown us that the end states of very massive stars, so stars that are born about 10 times more massive than our sun, are inevitably black holes. So when
Hmm.
he proposed that, it took almost 40 years for the community to accept that, and that's something, it's very well documented, the pushback and the resistance to that idea. But then that was established, that's the standard way. So, when I started thinking about this problem of, we started finding these supermassive black holes in the universe. So these are black holes that are million, billion times the mass of the sun, that are in the centers of galaxies nearby and far. And the question is, how could you grow something from like 10 times the mass of the sun, a little black hole, the kind that Chandrasekhar proposed, and that those have been discovered, they exist. And how would you grow it? Do we have time in the universe? Do we have processes that would grow the black hole? So it turns out that yes, we can grow them, but there's a timing issue. So you can grow the biggest ones that you see nearby today. But if we start seeing these behemoths earlier and earlier in the universe, then there's a timing challenge. So
Hmm.
that was the open question that fascinated me. And so I was thinking of, how could we circumvent this? So the obvious thing was, look, if you are born massive already, you have a head start, then the
Hmm.
timing
Hmm.
issue is not a problem. So then I started
Correct.
looking at the physics of how could you circumvent, forming a star, and could you just directly have a black hole is basically a very special place. It's a place where a lot of matter is concentrated in a very, very tiny region, extremely compact region. So that's
Hmm.
what you need to get to happen. You need to have a lot of matter, real matter, kind of condense, somehow coalesce into a very tiny region. And so I started looking for cosmic settings where that can happen. And then it became clear to me that in the very early universe, there's a lot of gas, and that this
Hmm.
gas, if you could somehow get it to aggregate and kind of flow into a very tiny place, then this could work. And so, and I think, when we talk about inspiration, right, an analogy is that when you're sitting in the bathtub and you pull the plug, you're done with your bath, you pull the plug and you see the
Yeah.
water going in really
Yeah.
fast as a
Uh-huh.
vortex. So something like that happens and can happen in the very early universe. I realized it can happen. It'll happen
Hmm.
in the conditions, in which conditions in our early universe that can happen. And that will then aggregate, and depending on how much gas you have, you can make a
Hmm.
black hole that is any size. So we
Hmm.
realized there was a sweet spot about 10,000, 100,000, 1,000, you could easily make something like that. And with that head start, you circumvent this huge potential problem that was looming to explain the origin, right? So it had just started. And so we proposed this, and with one of my postdocs, we wrote a set of papers. And,
Hmm.
people thought it was interesting, but they didn't believe that this would happen in our universe. Obviously, look, we are in an empirically driven science. So you need,
Correct. Yeah.
it needs
Need
to
proof.
exist in the universe, not just in my imagination or in theory
Correct.
papers, right?
Yeah.
So we waited and then we refined the model. And, ultimately we had to also show that computationally, with very
Hmm.
powerful computers, that we could kind of replicate this process that I was, we got to show
Hmm.
it's feasible. And so the computers were not up to scratch, and it took 10 years for the computing to
Yeah.
catch up. So we kept doing, whatever we could do at the time. And I keep telling you, right, the limits. So always aware that we can only go so far and demonstrate so much today. But when the
Yeah.
computers get faster in 2 years, we can do much better. So I never left this
Correct.
problem. I kept
Yeah.
at it, and every little refinement. And eventually in 2017, everything lined up to be able to make concrete predictions, especially for
Mm-hmm.
James Webb, that was going to be launched in a few years at the time. So we were
Mm-hmm.
able to predict with my team. We wrote a set of papers where we said, okay, this is exactly what James Webb, because we knew which instruments were going to fly, we knew how good those instruments would be. And we said,
Mm-hmm.
this is the spectrum you should see. If you see this, and it satisfies, the data satisfies these five criteria, then you most likely have a direct collapse black hole that is actually growing, that we are seeing. So it turns
Mm-hmm.
out, of course, the universe, I feel like I
Yeah.
personally got a gift from the universe.
Yeah.
And that
Right.
sort of first object was
Yeah.
found, and it satisfied all the six properties. So the thing, we need rigor, right? When you're trying to say that, the universe has produced an object that matches the predictions, has to be
Yeah.
very rigorous. So we said there are these six properties, and only if all of them are satisfied can we say this is most likely. That too, it's
Mm-hmm.
never conclusive, because one of the enigmatic properties of a black hole is that once matter goes into a black hole, you have no idea what all went
What
into it.
happens? Yeah.
And the way we figure out how a black hole forms is from the relationship of the black hole to its immediate environment. And so that's
Mm.
what his theory was about. Like, what kind of galaxy would this thing be sitting in? What would the properties of the light from the galaxy be? What would be the energy that is coming out of the growing black hole? So, one thing that we do see, we don't see the black hole itself, but because of the intensity of the gravity of the black hole, when gas gets pulled in and sucked in by the black hole, it's sped up, it's heated up, and it starts to glow. So, this is
Mm-hmm.
before matter reaches the point of no return for a black hole. En
Mm.
route to it, you can actually see the glow from the heated gas that is
Mm-hmm.
inevitably going to go in. I mean, that gas can't go
Mm-hmm.
anywhere else, it has to go in.
Correct. Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
what we see. So we predicted all of these things, and I think that, so, I had always been interested in
Mm-hmm.
trying to make black holes in many different ways, because I had this hunch that it
Mm-hmm.
seems that there are many, many more black holes. As the observers were turning up these black holes that were growing in the early universe, nearby universe, to me, it seemed like, okay, they are a little more ubiquitous than we
Mm-hmm.
originally thought, which
Mm-hmm.
means
Mm-hmm.
nature likely has multiple ways to make them. So I was on the
Mm.
hunt for multiple. So I came up with
Yeah.
another scenario, and that has also now been proven right. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think that it's it's the kind of, this is what I was, this is where I sort of wanted to sketch what I said. The baseline is mastery. So once
Correct.
you
Yeah.
have mastery, right, it's almost like jazz. Once you have
Right.
mastery, then you can improvise, right? And
Correct.
it's
Correct.
when you have the test bed for creativity and for
Mm-hmm.
the cliched out of the box thinking, to be able to go beyond what is
Yeah.
currently known and to the speculative realm, but not crazily speculative, because it's still always has to attend to the foundation that already exists of knowledge that is tested, that is proven. So I think that gives you the freedom, but it also gives you the constraints within which you
Correct.
kind of, you can let your
Yeah.
imagination go wild, but only
Yeah.
so wild, right?
Correct. Correct.
Um,
And I think what's fascinating about this is that because obviously your decades of research, we are trying to do it in 15 minutes. You can't serve justice. But I do want to say that, first of all, the theory that there are many ways something could happen, not just one way. And secondly, to have the patience to let the world catch up with you. I mean, the computing, everything to catch up with that, but being at it. First of all, saying there are many ways to do something, and secondly, being at it. And thirdly, even when you're looking for it, you have to know exactly what you're looking for. You have to be able to direct, say, look in this place, look for these five things, etc. I mean, it is so relevant to what we need to do in our lives to change things also. There is no one way to end hunger. There's
Absolutely.
no one way to solve a problem, and always be innovative about, hey, could it be this or could it be that? And about this particular theory, what's interesting to me again, application to life, is that for something to be powerful, maybe you have to start big, also. It's sort of, there's one way to say, hey, I'll start here and I'll grow there. But there may be another way to say, hey, if we want to start it, let all 100 of us put all our 100 hours and go into it, instead of I'll do 1 hour and prove and then go. So this is one of the things I found: when you have to solve a big problem, you need to start big. You need to start with every possible resource poured into it, and not just a little
Yeah.
bit at a
And
time.
but I
So,
think
yeah,
there are also, multiple ways of scientific practice. Scientific practice
yeah,
has currently evolved, as you said, into this sort of large scale, pulling in the expertise of many, many experts who have, very niche expertise, and then putting them in the room, letting all those ideas collide and see what comes out. I think that is sort of the way science is going. I am actually a proponent also, once again, for always for multiple possibilities, right? So I tend to work slightly differently. I work in very small groups, or with one or two people, because I find that when you're in a large collaboration and you're framed a question that you want to answer, those large collaborations require a lot of money. So there's a
right,
way in which you have to be conservative because it's a public money.
correct,
Remember, science is
correct, yeah,
publicly funded in the United States primarily.
yeah,
Let's hope it continues to be that way. But and therefore there's a responsibility and so
yes,
that tends
yeah,
to be a little more conservative. Whereas
mm-hmm,
if you are operating in these sort of small groups, right, you have a little more
yeah,
creative license. And
correct, correct,
you can take a
absolutely,
risk. You can take the kind of risk like 100-person collaboration cannot. And I
right,
think I tend to thrive on this. And of course, not every idea is going to pan out, but you have
mm-hmm,
to have the resilience and the grit to take the pushback. Oh, there was enormous pushback. And even
correct,
now, that's one of the good things about science, right? Is that
mhm,
people force you. There are lots of brilliant people, and they
correct,
force you to think sharper, harder, clearer, with sort of professional criticism, right? I mean, that's
mm-hmm,
very
mm-hmm,
much part of how science progresses. But
right,
there is also a pushback when, because personal ambitions, etc., all collide here, right? I mean, remember, this
right,
is very complex because people forget, they think scientists are these objective people wearing white lab coats. They forget that it's very human. It's a human activity,
right,
human
correct,
creative activity, and we bring our psychologies, our passions,
yeah,
to the job. And so it's very competitive. And so what I have found was that, you need a lot of grit and resilience
mm-hmm,
to
mm-hmm,
to deal with the pushback. You expect the pushback because that's part of the scientific process.
correct, yeah.
There are
You have to be
lots of
able
person,
to, justify yourself. I mean, you should be able to explain yourself also.
and
It's
then
not just
and
that,
remain
yeah,
motivated. Remain
correct.
motivated.
Yeah.
And I think, as you said, right, one of the things about kind of lessons that we can learn for people who want to kind of, break boundaries and kind of
Mm.
really push at the current limits, is like you
Mhm.
really have to not get deterred uh,
Right. Yeah.
by
Yeah.
criticism. And just, what I found is that you've always cannot lose track of, you've got to have your compassion with
Mm-hmm.
you, even while
Mm-hmm.
you're doing these hard-nosed calculations and presenting these results and pushing.
Yeah.
For me, what I found is a lot of the times when I was dealing with certain kinds of criticism, I'll say, okay, I understand that, this is a person who's been working for 20 years, longer than I have.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, this breakthrough has eluded them. And so,
Correct.
it's a
Yeah.
little complicated for them to accept, right?
Correct.
So,
Yeah.
and then I get it. And so I have often kind of, worked really hard on the persuasion. And of course,
Right.
in
Yeah.
science, there are means of persuasion, data, data,
Correct. Yeah.
simulations, whatever, right? More understanding.
Yeah. And I think, in summary, it doesn't matter whether you have 100% collaboration or a two-person collaboration. You need to be very rigorous about what you're doing. Is it the right way or not? There's no one right way. You have to constantly be checking and making sure, am I being responsible? Am I doing it right? And secondly, the thing I want to underscore here is that perseverance. If you believe something, you have to be at it for a while before you know the answer. And especially in the business world where we are measured by daily stock price and, short-term thinking, it's just the opposite of, we need to, if we want to really progress and solve big problems, we have to give ourselves that time to prove ourselves and be very diligent. I mean, don't just spend money like crazy, but uh, be responsible. I think these are the things we have to keep in mind of
Yeah, I
perseverance,
think
edge preservation. Like both are important.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you hit the nail, right? That, there will be certain kinds of, short-term problems with short-term solutions. And
Yes,
yes, you need a lot of great people to do those and deliver them because, we live in a
correct.
very complex world with many kinds of problems. But when you think
Mhm.
about like kind of the big challenges, which we know in science, we tend to name them as grand challenges, these are
Right, yeah,
complex problems, right?
yeah,
That inevitably that are going to take a long time to solve.
correct.
So I think
Yeah.
we have to be, as you said, be always aware that there are these sort of modes that we have to be
Mm-hmm.
operating between. Each one has its place, but that
Mm-hmm.
long-termism, right? Long-term thinking, the issue is that, you have to invest both time,
Mm-hmm.
money, resources, and energy into those sort of more complex global problems.
So let me ask you a few questions that are coming from the audience. One is, how important is math for future of astrophysics, and how do we as parents make science and math, all these things, fun for our kids instead of intimidating? And
Yeah.
also kind of a part of that is, a lot of your work requires creativity and precision. So how do you balance these two things, this scientific rigor? So if we think of, how do we train our children to
Yeah.
first of all be fascinated by science, and yet at the same time have equal measure of imagination, I mean, creativity and precision? What would you suggest to parents?
So I mean, I think that in many ways, if I had, I look at what all is available now, all the kinds of information that's available now on YouTube. There are
Mm-hmm.
all these, great science communicators who are putting material out, like books. Everything is available online if you want to read. So I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
a treasure trove of information. So access to information is really easy. And I think for young kids, right, I really believe that for a career in science, because of the way in which science works, you have to build a foundation. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's really important to have mastery of the fundamentals of science and math. And math is
Mm-hmm.
inevitable. You need
Yeah.
mathematics, you need, physics, chemistry, biology, whatever scientific discipline you are going to be grounding yourself in, and you need to have computational skills. And so all
Mm-hmm.
of these things are becoming easier and easier to learn. So
Mm-hmm.
AI can teach you computing
Mm-hmm.
so much more easily than you can learn. So you can learn at home, for example, right? How to
Mm-hmm.
write a Python script, to make a graph, to make, plot X versus Y, etc. So I think for school kids, when you're in school, I really think that mastering the foundations is the highest priority. I often find with parents who ask me, well, my child is 10 and they want to do research. No, they shouldn't be doing research. They can learn. What they should be doing is making sure that their foundations are really strong. And you can go deeper, you can learn better and more. And my recommendation is to focus first on solidifying your fundamentals, master what is taught in standard curriculum. I really don't think, I differ from many of my entire generation went to school when the expectations, we weren't doing project based learning or anything. We were learning math, we were learning physics, we were doing problem sets, we were learning by doing, right? And I think and look, my generation has changed the world and brought it to where it is today. So we're not doing too shabbily. Our education was not that deeply flawed at the end of the day, right? So I think there were some great elements there that had to do with foundations. And, so building up foundations is really essential. And then on top of that, I think exploring lots of different disciplines as young children. When I was 10 years old, I didn't know, the field wasn't that advanced. I didn't know what a material scientist or a material engineer who was fabricating new kind of surfaces. And I didn't know that. I didn't know about that. Now, all of these things are available to kids. I can actually find out the range of things that you can do, exciting things that you can do in STEM disciplines and beyond, right? And in terms of creativity, balancing, keeping creativity, I think that, this thing that we just talked about, right? I think where I learned to unleash my creativity is I've always had this thing, even when I was doing my problem sets in 10th grade, 11th grade, I would solve a problem, but I'd always want to see if I could do it multiple different ways. How can I solve this? How can I think differently and arrive at this answer, right? Arrive at an answer. And does it agree? What's it telling me about this approach versus that approach? So I think that, that is what sows the seed for future creativity when you have more expertise. And yes, there are some fields, for example, in math, for example, there are, very young people who are gifted, who don't need a lot of foundational knowledge, somehow has very deep insight into something about number theory or whatever. That's the different, those are very discipline specific things. But more generally, I just think that, getting your kids to pay attention to and you have fantastic textbooks. They don't have to be restricted to the textbooks that they have so for example, right, I learned physics from the Feynman lectures in physics. It's 3 volumes of an introduction to physics. Absolutely brilliant. And that's available online. Those lectures are available now. So, when you're studying physics in your 11th grade, you don't have to just worry about, passing that exam, which is fine. You have to do that. That's a necessary step. However, you can with your school curriculum, enrich it by going through Feynman's lectures, or reading a slightly more advanced textbook on your own. So I think that there are little things you can do to remain open and creative, and they don't have to be super deliberate. And I think that just allowing kids to also experiment and fail is very important. I do
Absolutely.
not have children of my
Yeah,
own, but
yeah,
I have many godchildren, and I see kids all the time, right, who are coming into university. And I
yeah.
find that one of the things increasingly over the last 10 years, been
Hmm.
teaching for 20 now, that
Hmm.
I've noticed that children are not as prepared to deal with failure.
Yeah,
And because
yeah.
that's a very critical part of, how to deal with it and how to move on from that or learn from that, of course, would be the best. But
Hmm.
I think if we can teach children that combination of how to not see failure in personal terms, but
Yeah.
as like, something that
The
exits
steps in
onto life.
moving forward. It's just one of the steps, that's all.
Yeah.
And I think there are, three different things that are really important that you're talking about. Is one is the expertise, the learning, etc. And the secondly, learning coming from multiple sources, not just from textbooks. There are lectures, there are talks, there are all kinds of things. And the third thing is it's a long haul,
Yeah, and
and there are
science
many
museums.
failures. Yeah, science. Yeah, absolutely. Science
There are some
museums, etc.
amazing science museums everywhere in the world.
Yeah,
One of my
yeah,
favorite ones is actually in the United States. It's a
yeah.
Liberty Science Center in Jersey City. I
Okay.
so wish I'd had something like that. You can go there and you can manipulate a lot of different things. A huge museum, lots of activities, and I think things that there are a lot of things like that in India as well. So I
Right,
think if
right.
in
Yeah,
every country, in Singapore, and I've read Japan, Korea, all of these
yeah,
places, there are these
yeah.
wonderful interactive museums and planetaria where you can go see shows.
Yeah, yeah. So, and the most important thing you said at the end is that accepting failure. So it's sort of, and maybe that's what we should close on to say, yes, you had this, you know, pretty much a rock star career, and we see the accolades, we see all these things. But in your journey, I'm sure there were times where people doubted you, questioned you, you didn't get what you wanted, or maybe you failed or whatever. So tell us a little bit about how do you how do you deal with it? How do you pull yourself up? And the failure could be any place. It could be personal, it could be professional, like all of us suffer failures in many
Yeah.
different fronts. So, what is your tool for dealing with failure?
Yeah, so of course I've had many challenges that have
Yeah.
come along the way, personal, professional, and so on. But I think that's where I think luck does play a part. So I've always had mentors around me and people like my parents, for example,
Hmm. Hmm.
always had much more belief in my capacities than I did at any given time. So they were always so confident that I had the capacity to overcome any failure, any setback, and to be back, enthusiastic, curious, pushing at what I, wanted to learn or do or whatever, right? So that has always been helpful. So I always had this backdrop. I had this chorus of people who over the years, many of them are MIT professors, so every stage, so many of my high school teachers, then my MIT professors, then my thesis advisor in Cambridge, and sort of all the people I worked with over the years. So I've
Hmm.
always built, I've had this kind of chorus of people who have been deeply supportive,
Yeah.
and that has been, just their existence, whether or not, I get counsel from them or whatever, just their existence. And I think that, some of this, as I say, it's luck, but it's not all luck, right? I mean, you create
You
these
have to be
people,
work at it. You have to
you have
work
to
at
work at it.
keeping those relationships
You
and
have to build those relationships. You
respecting.
have
Yes.
to identify those people, respect them. And obviously,
Mhm.
when you have that chorus, they will also critique you when they see you're doing
Correct.
something
Yeah.
that's not. And you have to be open to that as well, right? So I think you
Correct.
build
Correct.
this, and everyone needs to build their own support structure. And then,
Mm-hmm.
also over time, I think it's good to have a little bit of detachment from
Right.
everything.
Yeah.
Tend to be
Correct.
I'm quite, in many ways, I'm very a more detached personality. So
Mhm.
I don't feel I'm deeply invested, but my
Yeah.
emotions and my self-worth are not tied up with that.
Correct. Correct. Yeah.
And that has also required work. And, that's where I think, I have to credit my mom, who is just incredible. I mean, she's a sociologist by training, and therefore, she has a
Yeah.
deep understanding of those skills, and also she knows me very well. So I think, that
Yeah.
combination has been very, very powerful for me,
Yeah.
and many
Yeah.
colleagues, right? Because not
Correct.
everyone in your community is actually competitive. So I have a
Correct.
very
Yeah.
strong set of people who are my contemporaries, who are charting the same waters. We are often competing for the same things, but they still kind of strongly wish me well, like I do. So I serve as
Correct.
that for some people too. So, it's not just that, I have my chorus. I am that chorus for some
Correct.
people.
Yeah.
So, that kind of, learning to be part of a giving and taking community, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is also sort of, that's the tribe, right? The tribe that gives you a
Yeah.
lot, but from which you take a lot.
The quote that comes out of this for me is that find the chorus and be the chorus. You need to do both because
Absolutely.
otherwise you wouldn't have the world that we have around us. So I want
Yeah.
to, have the last question. Akriti is asking. So I think astrophysics seem to be gaining a more publicity, visibility in India lately, etc. So how do you see the field evolving here? And what milestones do you think we might reach in the next decade?
Wow.
And so that's one part. And another question came from a parent about, on the other end of the spectrum of how do people get into Yale? So if you combine the two, there is a certain mindset, there is a certain possibilities, and there's a certain mindset that we look for that the best. So maybe we can wrap up on you talking about what do where is this world going? Where is astrophysics going? And what do we need to be the best in that?
Right. So, I mean, I think astrophysics is a lot in the public eye right now because we have many incredible instruments in space and on the ground. And hence the pace of discovery has accelerated. And as I mentioned, right, it's, the confluence of ideas and instruments. So we have a community that has been very rich in producing ideas, testable ideas and predictions and so on, very active. And then we've had this community of technical people building these instruments that have those capacities to test, right? And we have everything successfully working, and to say nothing of the foundation, which is computation. I mean, computers are just so fundamental to everything that we do, and their sophistication, growing sophistication with storage, data manipulation, and now with AI, right? With the kinds of data crunching, the data deluge that we have will now be tractable because it's no longer tractable with simple computers and just our mind. So I think that's why things are really bursting out at the moment. There is a lot happening, and the pace of discovery it's not just that we've become better at PR. Often people ask me, it's not just that, the pace of discovery is really accelerated. And in terms of what does it take to get to, and the future is incredibly bright. I think that, there's going to be exploration of, the moon, Mars. I mean, I don't think in my generation we are going to settle on Mars or on the moon. I think it's far-fetched. There's some fundamental limitations that we have not yet circumvented, like, radiation. How does the human body, how do all the materials that we have created on Earth, spacecraft, etc., how they can withstand the kind of radiation you have in space? We've not solved that problem. That's a biggie, and we've not done that yet. But I know we will. I mean, we are incredibly creative humans, and we will. So I think the prospects are just incredible for what all we can learn about, the cosmos, where we came from, why we are here, and whether there are other planets with other forms of life, etc. I mean, all of that is just cracking open right now. In terms of what you can, I like people to not, it's true that, I've had this like incredible path to some of the top institutions and so on. And, it's just a kind of, it just worked out that way. I think that, getting into Yale or an MIT now is incredibly competitive. And I think it takes a huge toll on kids, and the parents are, of course, over involved in this process. And I think that, ultimately, it really doesn't matter where you do your undergraduate education. If you have that foundation and you have something to offer that is so unique because you have developed it, you were born with it, and you developed it. It's not enough just to be born with it, you have to develop it. And if you've developed it, and that can happen in any nurturing atmosphere. So I just think that, we need to kind of de-emphasize some of these aspirational goals, like, because I know that, kids get so caught up in thinking they want to go to one place, and if that doesn't work out, it sort of sets them back emotionally for years, which is such a waste. They're so creative at that age that you don't want them to. But I think also the expectations, because of the intensity of competition, is just like insane of, what it takes to
Yeah,
get in and what kind of
yeah,
kids get in. So I think it's great to, to have kids who are multi-talented explore lots of things, and that's the kind of resume these universities are looking for, you can say. But I think they're looking also for that kind of special spark, somebody who can do something beyond what looks natural, feasible in their environments, right? So if you come from, a very privileged home, and yes, you've done, equestrian, you've been an equestrian, you've done billiards, you've done squash, that's great. But that's because, your privilege has allowed you access to all of that. But the interesting thing is to be someone who comes from an underprivileged situation and has somehow done something to demonstrate that they have something to offer that goes beyond just what can be handed to them, right? So I think they're looking for that quality, I think, and I think that quality still is valued on top of everything else, like grades and this and that.
yeah,
And I think that, how do you convey that quality? I think you develop it, and I think that shines through. And if
yeah.
even if it's not picked up by a Yale or MIT for undergraduate education, it's going to be picked up at the next stage, right?
Correct. No, I think it's a great way to wrap up. You said something very important, is that a happy child, well-nurtured child who's curious is better than a stressed out child who feels like, oh my God, getting into Yale is the beginning and end of things. So I think instead of setting your eyes on where you go, it's think of how we are developing with the online, with all the things available. Any child anywhere can get access to so much more information than ever before. So I think if we make sure our children are curious, well nurtured, and they're excited naturally, as opposed to like this, putting a gun to their head that I somehow have to do this. I think the best we can do is create that nurturing environment for our kids
Absolutely.
instead of,
Create that nurturing
yeah,
environment and create like fully developed, healthy individuals on their way to adulthood, who
yeah,
are also psychologically and emotionally mature. For
yes,
a lot of our kids, and I think it was the case for me when I was very young. My intellectual development was way ahead of my emotional development. And it took
yes,
a
yeah,
while for them to sink. And I think if parents can be attentive to that,
correct, yeah,
my
yeah,
parents were, and they would often tell me about, life decisions, etc.
yeah,
They're like, you may
yeah,
want to wait to mature a little bit more before you did something like that.
right,
And so I think you're absolutely right that, and these very competitive environments, there's a certain kind of personality that it's better suited to. And
yeah,
the
yeah,
question is, it's better to look for an environment where you think you'll be, as you said, intellectually nourished and
yes,
psychologically nurtured,
yeah,
because bigger things are yet to come in life at that stage. When you're
mhm,
17, 18,
yeah,
19, future is really ahead. So
yeah,
those
yeah.
4 years are critical, but they are not the
Mhm.
be all and end all.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much, Priya, for your time. And I think we've had a great conversation with you. I mean, it's a lot of food for thought for parents, and here is to many, many more frontiers you're going to
Thank
cross,
you.
and still be this wonderful, accessible, promoter of science. And I really want to thank you for all the work that you've done, not just in doing science, but speaking science, and be so inspirational for young people, for general public like all of us, and always be accessible for that. So really, thank you so much for
No,
your time.
thank you so much. I mean, I think it's
Yeah,
really important for people to see that there is no one way to be a scientist, and that there are
yeah,
many ways, and that you can be someone like, I love fashion, I love jewelry, I love, whatever. I love a lot of different things,
yeah,
and that it's quite all right. And and you can
yeah,
be articulate also as a scientist, and you're
mhm,
not, there was sort of this unnecessary impression of, there's a certain impression of being a nerd or very narrowly focused person. And I think there are
yeah,
a lot of us scientists who do not fit that mold. I mean, and
correct,
scientists are like humans, they come in a whole bunch
correct,
of. So thank
correct.
you
Yeah,
so much for
yes,
this invitation.
thanks a
And
lot.
yeah, it's
Okay,
always wonderful to talk to you, Lakshmi. You have the most
thanks.
thoughtful questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Priya. Thank you. So, Team Herky, Barkha, everyone. So, thank you so much for your time, for making this happen.
I want to ask one question. Actually, I was typing it, then I thought, because we have quite
Yeah.
a few questions, if Priyamvada, you don't mind, I come from a science background. I did study astrophysics as a minor paper in my undergraduate. And one of the
Mm.
things, if you're from science, is that you need to have a lot of patience because discoveries just don't happen overnight, right?
Yeah,
And that's a true skill that I think a lot of people develop for their love for science. I did want
Yeah.
to hear your perspective on that actually, and I was hoping that somebody would ask, but nobody did. But if you don't mind
You
answering
mean
me,
about
like,
patience, the role of
yeah, we did
patience?
talk about
Yes.
that.
the
Yeah,
role of
right. Yeah,
patience actually,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
You
yeah,
have
and
to, and I think it doesn't, it's just an issue if you are expecting immediate results. So if you start out saying, look, this is not about immediate results, and
absolutely, yeah,
it's about that process rather than the outcome, right? And then, you become patient because, it's not like I produce one idea and I'm sitting around for somebody to come and help validate it, right? I've moved on to the next thing, right? I'll keep at this idea. I'm not going to discard it. I'm going to improve upon it. I'm going to make it more and more amenable to testing and validation as time goes on and the tools become available. But I've moved on, and I have an idea in something else. And the life in science means that you are constantly, you're like on the go, and you're not, and nobody is like a one hit wonder, right? You're like, you have to keep going, and that's part of a research life in science. I mean,
Absolutely,
it's
absolutely.
the frustration as well, and you're
I
right.
know.
In science, you have to learn to deal with frustration, and that's
Yeah,
because that's a very fundamental kind of frustration, right? Because every time I write a paper, it's a learning curve. You never
absolutely.
coast. You never coast. If you
Yeah.
coast, you're not at the frontier, right?
Absolutely,
Because
because you start with the hypothesis, and then during the course of your study or research, your hypothesis is either right or, like you said, it's a learning curve. You discover
no, no,
something
no. You
new.
have to first develop it, right? You have to
Yeah,
make it, develop that little hunch or wherever you start from, make it really sophisticated, testable, and persuadable. You have to persuade your scientific community, right? They have to reach a consensus that this is a valid idea and that this is worthy of testing, right? And validating. So I think that's the thing that takes a long time. So, for example, the scientific community with this idea of direct collapse black holes, right? It took them maybe about 10 years, 10-ish years to think, okay, it took them 2 years, whatever, a year to say, okay, it's physics is sound because it was peer reviewed and it was published, right?
yeah,
So there was nothing wrong. There was no wrong calculation or mistake, right? Then the question was, okay, would our universe have these conditions available for this kind of thing to happen? And that I think some people came around fairly quickly and they said, oh, okay, I think this could work, right? So I then there was a set of people who said it could work, but then there were people who needed to be shown that. I think that then it took about 10 years for the
yeah.
community to arrive at a consensus that not only was this interesting and plausible, but that we have to test this. It's important enough that we should test it,
And
right?
then you had the instrument that could test
Exactly.
it.
So, and
That
in
also.
some, yeah. And it's a two-way street, right? So when people were designing and refining the instruments on James Webb, they said, we won't have the capacity to test ideas like this, right?
Right,
And
yeah.
so the choices were made to also, so, but that's such a fundamental level of acceptance, right? So I already felt very much that deeply grateful to the community, because by then if they took it seriously enough to say,
Mm-hmm.
look, we've got to invest resources and time and energy into testing it. Then
Mm-hmm.
it's a question of, as I said, in cosmology and astronomy, it's you can't do any controlled experiment. So it's like,
Yeah.
if the universe gifts you, it gifts you. So,
Yeah.
and then you need luck. That's where you need luck, and that's where I had enormous luck that within a year or two of James Webb going operational, they found this object.
And I
So,
think, I do want to say patience doesn't mean you put something out there and wait for 20 years without
exactly.
doing
You have to
anything
be
else.
proactive,
It's
very
you got to be
proactive.
proactive. You got to try that. Let me try it this way. Let me try it that way. Let's talk to this one. Let's talk to that. You got to just keep doing and sometimes change the path. Oh, wait, this is not the way to ask. This is the way I'll ask. Not this one. I'll go there. So it's sort of, I think patience is not just sitting back and waiting, but patience is being at it 20 different ways, all the
Absolutely.
time.
And,
You're at
and
it.
in the case of science, absolutely right. And in the case of science, also discovering, right? So I realized that I also had to put together a team with the right skill set for the way in which I want to go forward, because I had the vision and I needed my early career researchers whom they have skill sets, but I know that I can spin off something very interesting for their future careers, because I believed and I could see that this is super rich, this area, this particular idea of, pathways to make black holes, multiple pathways. So many of the people who are on my team now are the experts in one pathway or the other or whatever, right? So I think that Lakshmi is totally right. It does, it's not a passive patience. It's
Mhm.
it's pursuit. It's dogged pursuit, but not waiting for the result, right? Dogged pursuit. And the key thing is not to say, okay, when is the result coming? When is that going to be tested? It's just kind
Mhm.
of waiting but proactively kind of. And
Mhm.
in the case of science, right? Obviously, you have to keep writing papers.
Yeah.
And so that you also don't get written out. So one of the key things now that I have to be very careful of is that, as I told you, about 10 years ago, lots of people thought, okay, this is doable or whatever, right? And now I have to be very careful that I don't get written out of this story, because it's so
Mm,
competitive that people are
mm,
willing to say, oh, well, 10 years ago I did this. And you're like, well, my paper was
mhm.
20 years ago. And it
Yeah.
makes a difference because it was a bigger risk. I mean, you came on board and you did a calculation jumping off mine, but
Hmm.
you didn't originate the idea, right? So, I mean, I think that's all the professional kind of
Yeah.
rivalry. And my mom often asks me, like, why do you accept all these? I travel a lot, go to lots of conferences, right? And I was like, it's so physically exhausting. You should kind of take it a little easy. And I'm like, no, Ma, if I don't go, I'm going to get written out of the story.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and my mom's like, even now? And I was like, yes. And she was like, yeah, I know. Science just seems
And we have proof of so many women, especially women, being written out of the story in the past. So many, actually.
And so
And
now, it's we have hindsight, we are aware of it, we know exactly how that dynamics works, and I'm not going
yes,
to permit it. I'm not going to
correct.
permit
Yeah.
it to happen, right?
Yeah.
So,
I just want to say one thing over here because I come from a science background, but I'm biological sciences, and in my optional paper I did choose astrophysics because I found it very fascinating. My professor for astrophysics used to say this: the recycle bin of science is never really recycled because no idea is ever a wasted idea. You dig
absolutely.
down in the recycle bin, find it, and then you find ways either to prove it right, prove it wrong, or come to an entirely new discovery.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah.
Priyamvada, I have to say it, I thoroughly enjoyed today's conversation because it was
so
so
much.
stimulating on so many different levels that um, like right now I have transitioned from science to communication and communities, but I'm still
Mm.
that person who believes that science does need a bridge where somebody simplifies science to a layperson language and terms, and that's what
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
aspire to do.
No,
Yeah.
great. Lots of best
Yeah.
wishes for your
Yes.
endeavor. It's very important.
Thanks, Priya. Priya, when are you heading to India next? When are you come to India
I
next?
don't know.
Okay.
Probably October, thinking
Okay.
about maybe October, but
Okay.
during fall break. Amma is
Okay.
here right now,
Right.
and she's
Okay.
heading
So that's
back at the end of the month. And
okay.
so I'm trying to go see her every 2 months or so. Uh,
Right. Okay.
Likely October, but
Okay. Okay. Great.
yeah, yeah.
Thanks a lot for your time,
Thank you so
Priya.
much. Yeah,
Okay.
bye. Take care.
Bye.
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 Thank you so
Thanks,
much, everybody,
everyone.
for joining in.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for
Bye.
being, Priyamada, thank you so much for being so awesome. And Lakshmi, as always, a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, bye.
Bye-bye.